couloirs when we reunite again. And now we are moving on to our fourth presenter. He, same as all the three previous researchers, is also from the Faculty of Arts at Charles University. His name is Stepan Pavlíček, and he wrote his bachelor thesis, and I believe he just finished it successfully not a long time ago, on the Gothic architect Peter Parler and his connections. So Stepan, take it away.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid I'm going after Eva with her absolutely top-notch presentation is a little hard thing to do, but I'll do my best. So let me start with saying that I study art history, and for the last almost 3 years, I've been devoted to one specific question. And that question was whether a certain architect traveled to a certain country, or at least knew the art of the country. The architect was Peter Parler, as Tina already said. He lived in the 14th century, and in the presentation, which I'm going to share with you in a bit, I'm going to try to show you how important the architect was and how important the implications of the answer to the question might be. So let's start. Let me see. There we go. So let me see. Okay, it doesn't work like that. Never mind. Okay. Now it does. So what we see is an interior of a late Gothic church of the 15th century, roughly 15th century. This one's from southern Germany. This one is from southern Moravia. This one's from southern Bohemia, both of them. This one's from southern Bohemia too. And what they have in common is at least two things. The fact that they use the same type of vaults, and the type of vaults is called net vaults. You can see here that why it's called net vaults. The ribs, the dark ones, create a mesh that was interpreted by the art historians as a net. So hence the net vault. That's the one thing they share. The other thing, and the most important thing, is that they all derive their designs from the work of this architect and sculptor, Peter Parler. He has a very, very special position in the history of 14th century architecture, because he's understood to be the father of late Gothic art, both in architecture and sculpture even. And that's why he's by some considered to be the Michelangelo of Middle Ages, because he truly defined an era. His work defined an era in art and architecture. So the question whether or not he traveled or knew about English architecture, specifically English architecture, might seem a little petty, but the implications are absolutely gargantuan. So I don't know what it was that brought me to this question. Part of it was ignorance, and part of it was arrogance, because looking back at the whole topic and the size of it, I would never probably have entered it. So yeah, here we have one of the greatest architects of the history. And we're asking whether or not he traveled or he knew about English architecture. His greatest work, and I'm sure many of you have been in here, and I hope all of you have been in here, is the St. Bartisi's Cathedral in Prague. He finished the cathedral. He took it up from this section onwards. Here we have his greatest piece, that was finished in 1385, and long afterwards, 19th century and even the start of the 20th century, was considered to be the fountainhead of late Gothic vaulting, and was one of the most revolutionary vaults ever done in the Gothic style. Why revolutionary? I'm going to show you here. You see, this is a very typical Gothic vault with the separate compartments. You can see it here. They're divided by this rib, and they're very separate. If you look here, the rib here would be the same here. But here, look what Peter Paulo did. He lets the rib reach overreach the compartments, and then sort of make the whole space one. So that was a total revolution. And as I've shown you at the start of the presentation, it took up there was a lot of it became the norm later on in the Middle Ages. So that's at least the basic novelty that he came up with. But the thing is, and I'm going to show you on the next slide, English vaults 50 or 30 years earlier used the same principle, and it seems that they were the only vaults in the then known world to use this type of vaulting. And that's why the scholarship started looking into whether or not he knew it or not. Here I highlighted the way the ribs are create a pattern. So let me show you this one. So the rib create so-called triradials. That's 1, 2, 3. That's the triradial. If you put the triradials on the opposite sides of the church, of the vault, they meet in the middle and create these lovely lozenges of alternating size. This is the small one, this is the big one, and this is the biggest. Well, that's the English vault. Here we have Prague. Here in Prague we have almost the same principle: small lozenge, bigger one, and then the biggest. And if you can see in the detail also, these little 3 dots are here too. That's a specific treatment of that specific formal aspect. I'm not going to go too much deeper into it because it's a very art historically, and I'm not sure it's relatable to people who don't study that question in depth. So, but that's one thing. Vaulting. You can see that the similarity is quite great. But that's not the only thing that Peter Paulo presented, introduced in Prague, and that had a large number of followers. This is one of the most quirky and one of the most interesting solutions in the vaulting of the 14th century. It's in the sacristy in the cathedral, and it's called the pendant boss. Boss is a name which is used for this thing, for this stone. In German, it's called Schlussstein. That is the finishing stone of a vault, which traditionally was just a piece of rock that was put onto the top of the vault to make it stable and sort of crown it artistically. Usually, it had some lovely form, as you can see here. What Peter Paulo did, though, was that he first of all, he changed the form of the boss completely and let it hang in the space and connected that with the vault by the means of these flying. They're called flying ribs, and that had, of course, major following in the history of art. We can see here in Vienna the same principle. It was actually done by his sons. This example, and then later on in the 15th century, it evolves into these crazy creations that almost forgot about the fact that their DNA started here in Prague. But of course, you know, the thing is, we can see similar solutions in England too. And the question is whether or not he must have known about it or not. And that's difficult to say with any amount of with being sure about that. Another thing, just a last thing that I'm going to mention, these wonderful portals that have been understood by the art history to be absolutely unique and never seen before in the European art, are actually to be found in another church in England. This is the Cathedral of Wealth, and it is believed that this is one of the things that he took inspiration from. So as I was saying, the topic of Peter Paulo in England has existed in the scholarship from the 1940s. 1940s. And it's not been resoluted. It has no definitive answer. But what is at stake is the origins of late Gothic art, which shaped the visual culture of Central European region. So it's not just a little something art historically relevant. It's relevant to the culture as whole, because late Gothic forms dominated the field for more than a century, more than 2 centuries, in fact, and created our visual style of an era. And visual style of an era always reflects, or probably reflects the life of the people in a way. So yeah, it's a wonderful topic to look into. And and it's, you know, as opposed to all of you who've presented before me, when I was going deeper and deeper into it, I was actually getting more and more confused, and it remains to be this way, because the topic, when you see it in its size, is absolutely insolvable. You cannot come up with any definitive answers, but that's also part of the fun of it. So okay, so I hope I didn't bore you to death. So thanks.
Oh, Stepan, not at all. Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Stepan?
Stepan, I thought that was fantastic. It makes me want to go to churches and just look up and appreciate all of the architecture. But also, I'm thinking about how you possibly could have proven that he was in England. So how did you, aside from the fact that it seems as if he was inspired by some of that English architecture, how did you try to prove that? What kinds of materials were you looking for?
Well, that's an interesting question, because when I started, I thought that I would look into the ways how he could have met, how he could have traveled, how he could have received drawings from which he could have taken the inspiration. But at the end, I realized that the only thing that are within my possibility to discuss is the forms. The forms itself. I decided not to go any further, because as it is, the comparison, the formal analysis and comparison is good enough to provide us with reasonably with answers that are reasonably well grounded. So that's a whole another level of research to ask how he got there, how he could have seen that, because it happened 600 years ago, and even nowadays we don't know how architects are being influenced, contemporary architects, and maybe they don't know it themselves sometimes. So we're looking at a guy 600 years dead, who might have seen this or that drawing and, you know, were at a loss, art historians.
Thank you for the answer. Anyone else has a question for Stepan? I see applause from Eva. Okay, maybe I have one more last question when I move on to presenting my topic briefly. But I want to ask you, Stepan, when did you fall in love, or when did you get interested in Petr Pavleš? And also, if you have a favorite location or building of his.
It was interesting because I think it was in the second year of my bachelor studies. I got to do something, an essay about churches and their spaces, and I came across a study that had the heading, "Why did Peter Parle come to England?" And at that point, of course, I didn't know about the fact, because what I maybe didn't highlight, it's not that well known, despite the fact that it is one of the greatest questions about Peter Parle. So I was shocked to see that Peter Parle, whom I thought to be the father of late Gothic, would have traveled to England or whatever. So I just it hooked me, and I'm hooked 3 years already, and it's amazing. It's never ending.
For me, it was just, if I can add, a fascinating difference between the churches you presented and Anička.
Yeah.
How far the styles traveled, and also I'm impressed by all your guys' ability, except it's her language, native language, that you write your thesis in Czech, which is what most students maybe don't know, and then you can present in English with all the terminology and so on. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you, Stepan, for your presentation. And